the dumbest Supreme Court justice in American history, Ketanji Jackson, who basically is your DEI Supreme Court justice. In her remarks today, she equated minority voters to disabled people.
Oh, hello? You all right now? Do you need help? I'm disabled.
That's essentially what she did here. This is by Fox News. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson sparked debate Wednesday after she invoked the Americans with Disability Act during oral arguments to illustrate how the government can remedy discrimination, an exchange that quickly took off on social media, where some critics accused her of comparing black voters to disabled persons. The back and forth took place during nearly 3 hours of oral arguments in Louisiana versus Calais, which centers on states' obligation to consider race when drawing congressional maps under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is highly unconstitutional. But of course, we allowed it because it was doing a racism to attack another racism. Essentially, the Democrat Party, the creators of the KKK, the states of slavery, Democrat Party, the Jim Crow law, Democrat Party, they were trying to use racism to keep black people from voting, to punish them for the mere existence of being free in the United States. They had lost the Civil War, but the Democrat Party didn't want to give up on their slavery. So they were trying to make life a living hell for the black community, which is ironic because the black community now votes for them by almost 90% on average. But at the time, this was the modus operandi. So the federal government had to go in there with troops to force segregation to end. And as part of that, you get the Voting Rights Act, which essentially said, fine, you did a racism, we're going to do a racism right back at you. But of course, long term, this is very bad because you've basically replaced one evil with another. Now you have discrimination based on race. And so rather than having a colorblind society, you have institutionalized by government fiat, by federal government fiat within the Voting Rights Act. It's a vile thing that never should have existed. You should never take into consideration people's race as to how to create a district. That should be illegal. It's the same thing as affirmative action. Illegal. But we did it because, again, it was all about punishing the racism of the old left. Absolutely disgusting that we went along with it, to be honest. Just disgusting. Now, Jackson's remarks were a follow-up to questions posed by Justice Elena Kagan, who had also pressed counsel for Louisiana on what remedies the government must provide in cases of discrimination under the 14th and 15th Amendments, and if they must take into account issues of intent. Going back to this discriminatory intent point and the fact that remedial action absent of discriminatory intent is really not a new idea in civil rights laws. And my paradigmatic example of this is something like the ADA. And believe me, she was getting roasted online. You had Spitfire on X. Thank you, Wolf, for this. Said Justice Jackson has to be the dumbest person ever to serve on SCOTUS. Black people, don't have equal access to the voting system. They're disabled.
I guess I'm thinking of the fact that remedial action, absent discriminatory intent, is really not a new idea in the civil rights laws. And my kind of paradigmatic example of this.
You know she got that from ChatGPT. I doubt she even knows what that word means.
Something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people.
But the ADA knows no bounds on race or sex. You can be disabled no matter what your background is. That's the point.
People with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant.
Imagine you're her and she thinks she's making a great point. How did she get to be a Supreme Court justice?
Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here.
I think she doesn't understand a lot of things.
The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting.
So the solution is to disadvantage non-minorities? You can't do a racism to replace a racism and expect things to get better. This garbage needs to end. And retarded people like Ketanji Jackson, who should not be a Supreme Court justice, people like her are the reason why racial tensions continue. It's the same reason why you're starting to see all sorts of anger online with minority groups, things like BLM, the hate group, Black Lives Matters, and Antifa, who used racial tensions to promote themselves and to promote violence in the name of equality. All they're doing is making a new generation of young people who grew up, who had nothing to do with the 60s or the 50s or anything else before then, who are just, for the sin of being white, are now blamed for everything. These people are becoming bitter and angry. All you're doing is creating a new generation of people who might become racists because you're treating them like shit because, why, they're part of the evil majority. Now, the lawyer arguing for Louisiana interjected to note that the difference is that the remedy under the ADA and other anti-discrimination laws are not stereotyping. Dun, dun, dun. They are not. Of course they're not. These are things that are universal. Everyone can have someone who's disabled in the family. Every race, every sex. I mean, there's only two, but you get the picture. And then, of course, Jackson said, it's not race-based. Quickly agreed of the ADA and other discrimination laws. I take your point. But what you're saying then, that if the problem of no access is about race, it's just too bad because you can't have a remedy that relates to race? And the council said, absolutely not, Your Honor. No, you can't have a law that uses race to discriminate, even if you're trying to make up for past discriminations. This is why racial tensions never ended. You take one racism and create another. It's perpetual crap. Now, despite the heavy backlash, Fox News writes, that erupted on social media and suggestions that she was describing black people or other minorities as disabled, Jackson's remarks were not unique, nor were they unique in the eyes of the Supreme Court. As she noted during the same exchange, the disabled terminology was used by the Supreme Court in 2021. The case Allen versus Milligan, which also dealt with race-based redistricting issues in the state of Alabama and issues of discriminatory intent. In Milligan, Jackson said the Supreme Court used the word disabled. We said that's a way in which you see that those processes are not equally open. Okay. She says, so I don't understand. Well, that's obvious. Why it matters whether the state intended to do that. What Congress is saying that if it is happening, which Section 2 gives us the tools to determine, you've got to fix it. The court's conservative majority seems poised to significantly weaken Section 2 of the Racist Voting Rights Act, though to what extent it will do so remains to be seen. This thing needs to be gutted completely. The solution would have been to punish the hell out of the old Democrat-run states for segregating and for hurting the black community. Not create a new racist order that will give preferential treatment to someone based on the color of their skin, and therefore discriminating against another person because of the color of their skin. Two wrongs don't make a right.